For 37 years, I've worked behind the walls of maximum security prisons, treating the most dangerous criminals our society has produced. Serial killers, psychopaths, monsters who haunted entire communities. But there's one case that still keeps me awake at night, one confession that haunts me more than any other. I'm Dr. Michael Harrison, and what I'm about to tell you about the Black Dahlia murder will challenge everything you think you know about Hollywood's most infamous unsolved case. In 1984, while working at San Quentin State Prison, I treated a dying inmate who claimed to know the truth about Elizabeth Short's brutal murder. For decades, professional ethics prevented me from speaking. Now, with all parties deceased, and the case still officially unsolved, I can finally reveal what he told me in those final sessions. This isn't just another Black Dahlia theory. This is the confession of a man who had nothing left to lose. January 15, 1947. A mother walking with her young daughter in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, spotted what she initially thought was a discarded mannequin lying in the grass. The pale, seemingly plastic form was positioned with disturbing precision, cut cleanly in half at the waist. But this wasn't a department store dummy. This was the mutilated remains of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, an aspiring actress whose murder would become the most notorious unsolved case in LAPD history. The crime scene was unlike anything investigators had encountered. Elizabeth's body had been drained of blood, surgically bisected, and posed with clinical precision. Her face bore a grotesque Glasgow smile, carved ear to ear with what appeared to be surgical instruments. The killer had taken approximately 10 hours to complete his work, demonstrating both anatomical knowledge and a disturbing artistic vision. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was the methodical work of someone with both medical training and a profoundly disturbed psyche. What the public never knew was the killer's psychological profile, details that only emerged through decades of criminal psychology research. The precision of the mutilation, the careful positioning of the body, the complete drainage of blood. These weren't random acts of violence. They were signatures of a killer operating under specific psychological compulsions, someone who viewed human bodies as canvases for their twisted artistry. Elizabeth Short had arrived in Los Angeles like thousands of other young women, drawn by dreams of Hollywood stardom. Standing 5 feet 5 inches tall with striking black hair and pale skin, she'd earned the nickname Black Dahlia from local soda fountain workers who admired her preference for dark clothing and dramatic makeup. But Elizabeth's Hollywood dream was far from the glamorous narrative she projected. She lived a transient lifestyle, moving frequently between apartments, hotels, and the homes of acquaintances. She worked occasionally as a waitress, but struggled financially, often relying on the generosity of men she met in bars and restaurants. This vulnerable lifestyle would ultimately lead her into the path of her killer. The investigation that followed Elizabeth's murder became a media circus unlike anything Los Angeles had ever seen. Over 150 suspects were questioned, including doctors, drifters, and Hollywood insiders. The case generated more than 500 confessions from attention seekers, each more bizarre than the last. But despite the massive investigation, involving over 400 officers and generating thousands of pages of reports, no arrest was ever made. What frustrated investigators most was the clinical nature of the crime. The killer had clearly possessed medical knowledge. The bisection of the body was performed with surgical precision, avoiding major organs and maintaining the structural integrity of both halves. This suggested someone with anatomical training, possibly a doctor, medical student, or mortician. The complete drainage of blood indicated knowledge of embalming techniques, further narrowing the potential suspect pool. The psychological profile that emerged painted a picture of a highly organized killer with narcissistic and sadistic tendencies. This wasn't someone who killed in a moment of rage. This was a predator who likely had fantasized about this specific type of murder for years. The positioning of the body, the careful cleaning of evidence, the timing of the discovery, everything suggested a killer who wanted his work to be found and admired. In my years treating violent criminals, I've learned to recognize certain patterns in their confessions. The way they describe their crimes, the details they emphasize, the emotions they display, these tell a story beyond their words. When my patient at San Quentin began describing the Black Dahlia murder in 1984, something in his demeanor told me this wasn't another fantasy confession. He was dying of lung cancer, with perhaps weeks to live. There was no benefit to lying, no audience to impress except a prison psychiatrist bound by confidentiality. He spoke with the clinical detachment I'd seen in other organized killers, describing the crime as if discussing a medical procedure. But there was something else, a pride in his work that chilled me to the bone. The details he provided matched the crime scene reports exactly, but more importantly, he knew things that had never been made public. He described the specific surgical instruments used, the order in which the mutilations were performed, and most disturbing of all, Elizabeth Short's final words. These weren't details available to someone constructing a fantasy. These were the memories of someone who had been there. He told me he had met Elizabeth at a bar on Sunset Strip in December 1946. She was alone, as she often was, nursing a single drink while scanning the room for potential benefactors. He presented himself as a talent scout, claiming connections in the film industry. This was a common ruse in 1940s Hollywood, and Elizabeth, desperate for her big break, was an easy target. Over several meetings, he gained her trust, promising screen tests and introductions to studio executives. He was articulate, well-dressed, and convincing, exactly the type of Hollywood insider Elizabeth hoped to meet. He claimed to have been a medical student before entering the entertainment industry, which explained his anatomical knowledge and access to surgical instruments. The murder itself, according to his confession, took place in a private medical facility where he had access after hours. He had lured Elizabeth there under the pretense of a photo shoot for a casting director. The location explained how he had time to perform such elaborate mutilations without fear of discovery. It also explained the clinical environment needed for the blood drainage and surgical precision observed at the crime scene. What emerged from these sessions was a portrait of a killer driven by a need to transform his victims into art pieces. He spoke of Elizabeth's murder as his masterpiece, describing the careful planning and execution with the same pride a sculptor might discuss their finest work. This wasn't random violence. This was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to shock and mystify. The psychological motivations behind the Black Dahlia murder revealed a killer operating under multiple compulsions. The surgical precision suggested a need for control and perfection. The public display of the body indicated a desire for recognition and notoriety. The sexual nature of some mutilations pointed to deep-seated psychological trauma and deviant sexual fantasies. This wasn't just a murder, this was the culmination of years of psychological deterioration. During our sessions, he described his childhood with the clinical detachment typical of antisocial personalities. Born into a wealthy family with medical connections, he had shown early signs of disturbing behavior, animal cruelty, fascination with death, and an inability to form normal emotional attachments. His medical training had provided him with the skills and access needed to fulfill his violent fantasies. The impact of Elizabeth Short's murder on Los Angeles was profound and lasting. The case exposed the dark underbelly of Hollywood's dream factory, revealing how vulnerable young women could disappear into a city that promised fame but often delivered exploitation. The media coverage sensationalized Elizabeth's lifestyle, often portraying her as complicit in her own demise, rather than recognizing her as a victim of systematic predation. The investigation itself became a cautionary tale about media interference in criminal cases. The massive publicity generated hundreds of false leads and confessions, overwhelming investigators and potentially allowing the real killer to escape detection. The case file, eventually growing to over 10,000 pages, became unmanageable, with crucial evidence potentially lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. What frustrated law enforcement most was the organized nature of the killer. Unlike crimes of passion, which often leave abundant evidence, the Black Dahlia murder was carefully planned and executed. The killer had anticipated police procedures and taken steps to avoid detection. The crime scene was almost sterile, cleaned of fingerprints and DNA evidence decades before such technology existed. The psychological aftermath of the case extended far beyond law enforcement. Elizabeth Short's murder became a cultural touchstone, inspiring countless books, films, and theories. But this posthumous fame came at the cost of her dignity, with her life and death becoming entertainment rather than tragedy. The victim became secondary to the mystery, her humanity lost in sensational speculation. From a clinical perspective, the Black Dahlia case represents a perfect storm of predatory behavior meeting victim vulnerability. Elizabeth Short's transient lifestyle, financial desperation, and trusting nature made her an ideal target for a sophisticated predator. Her killer understood these vulnerabilities and exploited them with methodical precision. The confession I heard in those San Quentin sessions painted a picture of a killer who had studied his victim extensively before striking. He knew her routines, her desperate circumstances, and her dreams. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a predator who had selected his prey carefully and patiently groomed her for murder. What makes this case particularly chilling is how the killer manipulated Elizabeth's hopes and dreams against her. He used her aspiration for Hollywood success as bait, transforming her greatest desire into the trap that led to her death. This psychological manipulation is characteristic of organized killers who view their victims not as human beings, but as objects to be acquired and transformed. The medical knowledge displayed in Elizabeth's murder suggests the killer had extensive anatomical training. The precision of the bisection, performed without damaging internal organs, required detailed understanding of human anatomy. The blood drainage techniques indicated familiarity with embalming procedures. These skills pointed to someone with formal medical or mortuary training, significantly narrowing the suspect pool. But knowledge alone doesn't create killers. Psychological pathology does. The transformation of medical skills into instruments of torture reveals a mind that had divorced itself from the healing purpose of medicine. This wasn't someone who had simply snapped. This was a carefully planned perversion of professional training for sadistic purposes. If you're watching this from Los Angeles, I want you to think about something. This case happened right in your backyard, in neighborhoods you probably drive through regularly. Drop a comment and let me know what part of LA you're watching from, and whether you've ever visited Leimert Park, where Elizabeth's body was discovered. It's fascinating to connect with viewers who share the geographic connection to these historical mysteries. The lasting impact of the Black Dahlia case extends far beyond Los Angeles. It fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches organized violent crime. The case highlighted the need for better evidence preservation, more sophisticated psychological profiling, and coordination between different investigative agencies. Many modern criminal investigation techniques can trace their development back to lessons learned from this case. The confession I heard at San Quentin provided closure to questions that had haunted investigators for decades. But it also raised new, disturbing possibilities. If this patient was telling the truth, it meant a methodical killer had operated in 1940s Hollywood with impunity, potentially claiming other victims whose murders were never connected to the Black Dahlia case. During our sessions, he hinted at other crimes, other young women who had trusted him and disappeared into the dark corners of Los Angeles. While I cannot verify these claims, the psychological profile certainly suggests someone capable of serial predation. The organized nature of Elizabeth's murder, the sophisticated victim selection, and the killer's obvious satisfaction with his work all point to someone who had likely killed before and might have killed again. The technical aspects of the murder revealed a killer operating with almost scientific methodology. The use of surgical instruments, the systematic approach to mutilation, and the careful staging of the crime scene all suggested someone who approached murder as a form of research or experimentation. This wasn't emotional violence, this was clinical sadism elevated to an art form. What emerged from the psychological evaluation was a portrait of someone who had completely dehumanized his victims. He spoke of Elizabeth not as a person, but as raw material for his creative vision. This level of objectification is characteristic of the most dangerous type of serial killer, those who view murder not as violence, but as creative expression. The geographical aspects of the case also revealed important psychological insights. The killer chose to display Elizabeth's body in Leimert Park, a middle-class neighborhood where the discovery was guaranteed but not immediate. This location choice demonstrated his desire for his work to be found and admired while allowing him time to distance himself from the scene. It showed sophisticated understanding of police response times and investigation procedures. The positioning of the body itself was perhaps the most revealing aspect of the killer's psychology. Elizabeth was placed with her arms above her head, legs spread out, positioned to create maximum visual impact for whoever discovered her. This wasn't just disposal of evidence, this was presentation of artwork. The killer wanted his work to be seen, photographed, and remembered. The precision of the mutilations extended beyond simple anatomical knowledge. The killer had taken time to clean each wound, remove debris, and even wash the body before positioning it. This level of care in the presentation revealed someone who took pride in his work and wanted it to be perfect when discovered. It was the behavior of an artist unveiling his masterpiece. From a criminal psychology perspective, the Black Dahlia murder represents a textbook case of organized serial killing behavior. The careful planning, sophisticated victim selection, methodical execution, and strategic body placement all indicate a killer operating at the highest level of criminal organization. This wasn't someone struggling with impulse control. This was a predator operating with deliberate, calculating precision. The psychological tools available in 1947 were primitive compared to modern criminal profiling techniques. Investigators had to rely primarily on physical evidence and witness testimony, lacking the behavioral analysis tools that might have identified the killer's psychological profile. Today, the same crime would generate a detailed psychological portrait that could significantly narrow the suspect pool. The confession sessions at San Quentin revealed details about the killer's methodology that were both fascinating and disturbing. He described his approach to victim selection with the same clinical detachment a researcher might use to discuss laboratory specimens. Elizabeth Short hadn't been chosen randomly. She had been selected based on specific criteria that made her both vulnerable and suitable for his purposes. If you're finding this deep dive into criminal psychology as fascinating as I do, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These historical true crime cases offer incredible insights into criminal behavior, and I have several more unsolved cases from this era that reveal similar patterns of sophisticated predatory behavior. Your subscription helps me continue researching and presenting these complex psychological profiles. The timeline of Elizabeth's final weeks revealed a killer who had invested significant time in grooming his victim. The multiple meetings, the gradual building of trust, the promises of Hollywood success, all of this demonstrated patience and planning that contradicted the spontaneous violence initially theorized by investigators. This was a predator who understood that the best victims are those who come willingly. The killer's knowledge of police procedures also became apparent in how he structured the crime. The location choice, timing of body placement, and destruction of evidence all showed understanding of criminal investigation protocols. This suggested someone who had either studied criminal justice or had previous contact with law enforcement, possibly as a suspect in other cases. The psychological trauma inflicted on Elizabeth before her death was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the confession. The killer described prolonging her suffering not out of rage, but out of curiosity, studying her psychological responses as methodically as he later studied her physical anatomy. This level of calculated cruelty revealed a mind completely divorced from human empathy. The medical techniques used in the murder demonstrated not just knowledge, but practice. The precision of the cuts, the efficiency of blood drainage, and the surgical skill displayed all suggested someone who had performed similar procedures before. Whether on living victims or through legitimate medical practice, this killer had honed his anatomical skills to a frightening degree of precision. The staging of the crime scene also revealed important details about the killer's psychology. Every aspect of Elizabeth's positioning was intentional, designed to create maximum impact on whoever discovered her. The killer understood the psychological effect his work would have on investigators, witnesses, and the media. He was orchestrating not just a murder, but a psychological assault on the entire community. The lack of sexual assault, despite the sexual nature of some mutilations, indicated a killer whose gratification came from control and artistic expression rather than traditional sexual violence. This type of psychological profile is particularly dangerous because it suggests someone capable of extreme violence without the emotional instability typically associated with such crimes. The cleanup of the crime scene demonstrated sophisticated understanding of forensic evidence decades before DNA analysis existed. The killer knew which evidence to destroy and which could be safely left behind. This level of forensic awareness suggested someone with law enforcement knowledge or extensive study of criminal investigation techniques. The psychological manipulation used to lure Elizabeth to her death revealed a predator who understood human psychology as thoroughly as he understood human anatomy. He exploited her dreams, her financial desperation, and her trusting nature with the precision of a surgeon. This wasn't random predation, this was psychological warfare waged against a carefully selected victim. The duration of the torture and mutilation process, estimated at over 10 hours, revealed a killer with extraordinary patience and self-control. Most violent crimes are completed within minutes, driven by emotion or impulse. The Black Dahlia murder represented something far more dangerous: calculated, methodical violence executed with artistic precision. The preservation of certain organs while destroying others showed selective knowledge that went beyond basic anatomy. The killer understood not just where to cut, but what to preserve for maximum psychological impact. This level of precision suggested extensive study of human anatomy, possibly through formal medical education or mortuary science training. The psychological profile that emerged from these confessions painted a picture of perhaps the most dangerous type of killer, one who combined high intelligence, sophisticated planning abilities, and complete emotional detachment. Unlike killers driven by rage or psychosis, this predator operated with the calm precision of a surgeon, making him almost impossible to catch through conventional investigative methods. The choice to confess decades later only when facing death revealed a killer who had carried the secret successfully for nearly 40 years. This level of self-control and compartmentalization is characteristic of the most successful serial killers, those who manage to operate for decades without detection. It suggests someone who understood not just how to kill, but how to live with the knowledge of what he had done. What makes this confession particularly credible is the psychological consistency of the details. The killer's description of his methods, motivations, and emotional responses aligned perfectly with established psychological profiles of organized serial killers. These weren't the fantasies of someone seeking attention. These were the methodical recollections of someone describing actual experiences. The impact of Elizabeth Short's murder on criminal investigation techniques cannot be understated. It exposed weaknesses in evidence preservation, witness protection, and media management that led to significant reforms in police procedure. Modern homicide investigation protocols can trace many of their standards back to lessons learned from the Black Dahlia case. The psychological counseling I provided to this dying patient revealed layers of complexity that challenged everything I thought I understood about criminal motivation. His ability to compartmentalize his violent acts while maintaining a successful professional life demonstrated a level of psychological sophistication that was both fascinating and terrifying. He was in many ways the perfect predator. Here's something I want you to consider as we near the end of this deep psychological dive into one of America's most notorious unsolved murders. What do you think drives someone to confess to such heinous crimes only when facing death? Is it guilt, a desire for recognition, or something else? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your insights often provide new perspectives on these complex psychological profiles. The confession sessions at San Quentin ended with the patient's death in early 1985. He took whatever remaining secrets he possessed to his grave, leaving me with knowledge that I've carried for nearly 40 years. Professional ethics prevented me from sharing this information while it might have influenced ongoing investigations, but with all parties deceased and the case officially cold, I felt compelled to finally reveal what I learned. The truth about Elizabeth Short's murder may never be officially resolved. The physical evidence from 1947 is long gone, the witnesses are dead, and the confession I heard cannot be independently verified. But from a psychological perspective, the details provided during those final sessions offer the most comprehensive explanation for one of America's most notorious unsolved crimes. The Black Dahlia case represents more than just an unsolved murder. It's a window into the darkest aspects of human psychology. The killer's ability to manipulate, torture, and kill with such methodical precision reveals capabilities that challenge our understanding of human nature. It reminds us that the most dangerous predators often hide behind masks of respectability and professional success. Elizabeth Short's story didn't end with her death. It began a decades-long journey through American popular culture, inspiring countless theories, books, and films. But in all the speculation and sensationalism, the truth of what happened to this young woman has been lost. She became a mystery rather than a victim, her humanity sacrificed to our fascination with unsolved crimes. As a psychiatrist who has spent his career studying the criminal mind, I can say with certainty that the person who killed Elizabeth Short was among the most dangerous types of predators our society produces. The combination of high intelligence, medical knowledge, and complete lack of empathy created a killer capable of extraordinary violence while maintaining a facade of normalcy. The confession I heard at San Quentin may be the closest we ever come to understanding what really happened to Elizabeth Short in January 1947. Whether you choose to believe it or not, the psychological insights it provided have deepened our understanding of how such sophisticated predators operate. And that understanding, perhaps, is Elizabeth's final gift to us, knowledge that might help prevent future tragedies. The Black Dahlia case will likely never be officially solved. Too much time has passed, too much evidence has been lost, and too many witnesses have died. But the psychological profile revealed through this confession provides a chilling glimpse into the mind of someone capable of transforming medicine's healing arts into instruments of unimaginable cruelty. Elizabeth Short came to Hollywood seeking fame, and found instead a predator who would make her more famous in death than she ever could have been in life. Her story reminds us that behind every unsolved mystery is a real person whose life was cut short by someone who viewed human beings as objects to be used and discarded. The truth about the Black Dahlia murder may never be proven in a court of law, but the psychological truth revealed through those final confessions at San Quentin offers perhaps the only resolution this case will ever receive. It's a truth that challenges us to understand not just what happened, but how such darkness can exist within the human mind. After 37 years of treating the most dangerous criminals our society produces, I can say that the person who killed Elizabeth Short represents the absolute pinnacle of predatory sophistication. The combination of planning, precision, and psychological manipulation he displayed has never been matched in any case I have encountered since. If you've stayed with me through this deep psychological analysis of Hollywood's most notorious unsolved murder, please take a moment to hit that like button. These complex criminal psychology cases require extensive research and analysis, and your engagement helps me continue exploring the darkest corners of human behavior. The Black Dahlia case may be nearly 80 years old, but the psychological insights it provides remain as relevant today as they were in 1947. Elizabeth Short's legacy isn't just the mystery of her death. It's the window her case opened into the sophisticated world of organized serial predation. The killer who took her life demonstrated capabilities that law enforcement was unprepared to handle in 1947, revealing the need for new approaches to criminal investigation that we still use today. The confession I heard in those final sessions at San Quentin will remain with me for the rest of my life. It provided answers to questions that had haunted investigators for decades, but it also raised new questions about how many other victims this predator might have claimed. The Black Dahlia murder may have been his masterpiece, but it likely wasn't his only canvas. As we conclude this journey into one of America's most notorious unsolved murders, remember that behind every case file and psychological profile is a real person whose life was tragically cut short by someone who viewed human beings as objects to be used and discarded. The truth about the Black Dahlia murder may have died with my patient at San Quentin in 1985, but the psychological insights his confession provided offer the most complete picture we may ever have of how a brilliant mind can be twisted into something capable of unimaginable evil. In understanding the killer, we honor the victim and perhaps prevent future tragedies. Hollywood's most gruesome unsolved murder remains officially unsolved, But sometimes, the most important truths aren't found in court records or police files. They're found in the final confessions of dying men who have nothing left to lose but the weight of their terrible secrets.